Protesters blocked both lanes of I-43 this afternoon, causing a major traffic blockade in downtown Milwaukee. They abandoned their cars in the north and southbound lanes and then formed a human chain across the entire freeway.
That was Friday in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 74 protesters arrested after carrying out a coordinated plan to block the interstate and bring downtown Milwaukee traffic to a halt. Those protests on Friday were in the name of Michael Brown and Eric Garner, black men killed by police officers who then were not charged in those deaths. There, of course, have been nationwide protests over the Garner and Brown killings. But in Milwaukee, the protests have also been about the case of Dontre Hamilton. In April, Dontre Hamilton was shot fatally more than a dozen times by a Milwaukee police officer in broad daylight in a downtown Milwaukee park that's called the Red Arrow Park. Mr. Hamilton was unarmed. His family says he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and from hallucinations. The Milwaukee Police Department says an officer approached Dontre Hamilton while he was asleep on the ground in that park downtown. The officer says he attempted to pat down Mr. Hamilton, who then became resistant. He then tried to subdue Mr. Hamilton using his baton. Police say Dontre Hamilton then took the police officer's baton and struck the officer with it. And then the officer shot Dontre Hamilton multiple times, 14 times. That officer was later fired by the Milwaukee Police Department, not for anything related to his use of force in that shooting, but for not following department protocol during the encounter that led up to the shooting. The officer has contested his firing. In other high-profile cases where stops by police officers ended with the deaths of unarmed citizens, local prosecutors have brought those cases to local grand juries, and then those local grand juries have decided not to charge the police officers. That's what happened in the Michael Brown case in St. Louis. That's what happened with the Eric Garner case in Staten Island. In Wisconsin, though, they have a different way of dealing with this kind of thing, at least a different way of dealing with part of it. A week before Dontre Hamilton was killed by that police officer in that downtown Milwaukee park, just a week ahead of that, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker signed into law an unprecedented bipartisan bill that changed the way Wisconsin handles the investigation when a police officer kills someone. The new law requires that the investigation into any police shooting must involve at least 2 investigators from outside the police department. The idea is to keep police officers from being in the position of investigating their fellow officers from the same police force. Wisconsin is the first state to do something like this statewide, but it's that state's effort basically to mitigate the conflict of interest that can be inherent in the way we investigate most of these cases now. And because that law was signed just a week before Dontre Hamilton was killed by that Milwaukee police officer, Dontre Hamilton's death was the first case to be handled under the rules of this new law. It wasn't just the Milwaukee Police Department investigating itself. They structured it differently. 2 special agents from the state, from the Wisconsin Department of Justice, were picked to lead the investigation. Then, instead of going to a grand jury, the district attorney in Milwaukee looked at their work and made the decision himself whether the officer would face charges. Now, Dontre Hamilton's family has questioned all along whether these agents were actually independent. They allege that the people who were doing this investigation weren't actually outsiders. They were working too closely with police in Milwaukee, despite the change in the law. Well, for more than 6 months, the family has been waiting for an announcement from the district attorney to hear the results of this inside-outside investigation. Protests continued throughout this time. Last week, Governor Scott Walker announced that the National Guard would be ready when the DA's decision came out, just in case. On Friday, we saw the interstate blocked. On Saturday, the National Guard began calling up reserve officers. Finally, this morning, nearly 8 months after Dontre Hamilton's death, the Milwaukee County District Attorney announced that he would not seek state criminal charges against the officer involved in this shooting. The district attorney said that because Dontre Hamilton was attacking the officer with a deadly weapon, with the officer's baton, the officer had justification to shoot in, quote, justified self-defense. After that decision this morning to not press charges, protesters marched again to the park where Dontre Williams died. They went to a downtown church. They marched at the federal courthouse. The attorney for Dontre Hamilton's family appealed to the Department of Justice, the federal Department of Justice, to open a federal investigation into Dontre Hamilton's death. Well, tonight, the U.S. Department of Justice has announced that it will undertake a federal review in this case in Milwaukee, the same way the department has opened investigations into the deaths of Michael Brown in Missouri and Eric Garner in Staten Island and Trayvon Martin in Florida. These have been difficult days and difficult weeks and difficult months in a long national conversation about policing and race and civil rights in this country, and it is nowhere near finished yet.